First of all, thank you for coming. We wanted to kind of introduce or reintroduce to you the infection chain concept. The first time that we brought it out and talked about it was really a lot of theory and a lot of concept at ASV back in March. And we've worked through it a lot. We've had some really good successes looking back at some of the data that's already out there, but also we're in the midst of creating some data. So in my presentation, I just wanted to share a little bit more about the concept, describe exactly what we're talking about, and then Dr. Eduardo Feno will come up. He'll talk about mycoplasma in the infection chain with mycoplasma, and very much from a science level view. And Dr. David Boehringer from Cargill will be joining and putting it much more into a practical and economical level that we all can go out and utilize in the field. And then at the end, Dr. Reed Phillips will join the three of us for a Q&A. Dr. Phillips is focused in on PERS. You've all heard him talk, and really his work with PERS in the infection chain is what we're basing a lot of our future work on right now. So the infection chain, as we look at it, is really starting from the top, where disease might start, and coming all the way down to the piglet, rather than, well, when I was in practice, I was a wean to finish veterinarian for quite a few years, and so I started seeing the nursery pigs coming out, and then I saw them through finishing. And so whatever my customers were given from the sow farm, that's what I had to deal with. And so I was so segmented from anything that happened from the sows to the gilts, I really had no say-so in the health. I just had to either vaccinate them or give them antibiotics. So taking away from the piglet approach and going to a more broader approach, going to a system level that would include multipliers in the sow farms. And really looking for the root of the problem. Far too often we're trying to vaccinate pigs for a disease that they already may be colonized with, or they may already be infected with, or they're becoming infected so soon after they arrive to that nursery farm that we don't have a chance to protect them. So we're trying to get back to the root of the problem, which in some cases would be back to the sow farm, and even the sow farm, the problem may be the gilts coming into the sow farm. So if we look at a human side and the individual animal, we talk about susceptible animals that could be infected and how they become infected. There's reservoirs of disease out there. It could be the environment. There's disease that lives in the environment. It could be other species. For example, if we're talking about flu, it could be birds, it could be humans. Other animals, so environment, other animals, but most often with pigs and the diseases we're talking about, the reservoir is another pig. Now, as we're talking about vertical transmission, that reservoir is oftentimes the dam, so either the gilt or the sow that is farrowing those piglets. If we look at the pig production cycle, and this slide was obviously taken from a little bit older type of situation than we're used to nowadays. If you can look at the breeding example here, this is natural cover breeding rather than AI, but it still holds very true. If the input of new gilts and boars, and it depends whether it's a closed system or whether they're purchasing gilts from the outside, where those gilts come from and what the health is. But they're really coming into the sow herd. They're going through either a gilt gestation, or excuse me, a gilt development unit, going into an isolation, and then the sow herd. And then from the sow herd, which would be the gestation house, they make it to the lactation, and where pigs are farrowed, there's vertical transmission, and then eventually those pigs come out. You can see that if we're only targeting vaccinating pigs that are at the nursery stage, we've missed a whole lot of opportunity to prevent disease. So we put it in a more linear fashion, just as an example of how to best look at it. We can see the production chain on one side. We have the multipliers going to the gilt gestation units, the gilt development units to the sow herd, and then down to nursery finishers or wean to finish units. So we're all very used to looking at the linear flow of the production chain. If we talk about the infection chain, oftentimes it's very similar. Talk about with PERS. So if PERS gets into the gilts, they can bring it into the sows, and then they're obviously going to give it down to the pigs. This isn't hold true for a lot of our respiratory disease, many of our enteric diseases as well. Putting in another fashion, again, a chain, oftentimes they're connected together. And so if we had a farrow to finish operation, for example, where they're bringing gilts into their own herd from the finishers, whatever diseases are in those finishers are now in their gilts, because of internal multiplication, it comes into the sows and then continues to move around the cycle. Another term we're throwing in, this is the second time you've seen this slide here, is really the prevention chain. So we know how the disease is coming into the farm, so it may be entering from the sows down to the pigs. Now we have to go and prevent it. So it's not just vaccinating those individual pigs, it's going back to the sow herd, going back to the gilts, seeing where the disease is actually entering, and then giving a chance to prevent the disease getting into those piglets so that you can vaccinate those piglets, or they can start out in the nursery before they are horizontally infected in the field. And we'll use PRRS as an example. Look, there's a couple slides here. When we first started with our PRRS vaccine, we talked a lot about vaccinating individual pigs. And so we'd vaccinate those pigs, and some people had some success, and there were failures out there. And it's really because we weren't understanding the infection chain. So we may have been vaccinating pigs that were already positive for PRRS. And if they're already positive at 3 weeks of age for PRRS, and you're vaccinating them, the vaccine doesn't have a chance to prevent it. They're already infected. So we've seen that vaccine can work out in the field, but we must have the right situation for it to work. And so future work, or later work that came out, this is just an example from Daryl Goldkamp at Iowa State, is looking at what the value is of pigs that are weaned negative versus those that are weaned positive. So this chart over here is showing is a comparison to a baseline. That baseline are pigs that are weaned positive with PRRS. In these two examples here, both cases, these pigs are weaned negative. On the left-hand case, they stay negative for PRRS all the way throughout finishing. And so that value there from his study showed that it's over $4.50 per pig for simply weaning them negative. Whereas the right-hand part of the chart, these pigs are also weaned negative, but they may become infected in the future. However, comparing that situation to pigs that are weaned positive, there is still a value. So if you can prevent infection from the sows to the pigs, there's still a large value on top of what you could vaccinate them for. So again, in review, we're very familiar with the production chain of gilts going into the sow herds, farrowing, possible chances of vertical transmission from the dams down to the pigs. And we can talk about the infection chain, the disease that's going to follow those gilts down into the sow herd and down to the pigs. Possibly the gilts, some of these gilts that we have are the cleanest gilts that we have, and then there's going into the commercial sow herds that may be infected and stirring up disease. And as we'll see in some of the examples, that's the exact case that's happened here. And then obviously, if we have disease in the gilts and the sows, we must go down the prevention chain and how to prevent those diseases getting to the baby pigs so that our vaccines have the best chances of working.